Good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you this evening again. We are going to start our meeting, our panel discussion. It's the Real Talk Family Life, building shatterproof families one brick at a time. We will be talking about the Caribbean man this evening, but just before we get into our discussion, let me remind you to use the emotions features and you can raise your hand if you have a question. You can give a clap if you have something you want to share somebody on, and there's some others like the thumbs up. They could even cry if you wish. So we are going to get started, and we want to take some time to just introduce our panelists to you this evening. And without any further ado, let me just make sure I have the pictures on the screen, and then we are going to get started. So two are here with us this evening. Just give me one sec. Yes. Okay, so two of our panelists are here with us this evening, Reverend Ronald Nathan and Mr. Felix Pearson. And so, Rev, could I start with you? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, just a little background to your perspective that you're bringing to the topic this evening.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And if there are any others outside of our time zone, good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be. I am Reverend Ronald Nathan. I'm the minister at the Hogard AME Zion Church in Jackson, St. Michael, in the island of Barbados. I am British born of Trinidadian parentage and grew up in the island of Trinidad, or the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. I have been in Christian ministry. Oops, my picture has disappeared. Sorry. Yeah, I've been in Christian ministry for the last 43 years. I've been a missionary, a minister, a Christian executive in East Africa, United Kingdom, and currently pastoring, as I said, in Barbados. I come to this subject as a Caribbean man with great interest in Caribbean men. As a matter of fact, I relocated to the Caribbean back in 2003 to 2016 because of concerns around young Caribbean men and criminality. I will stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Reverend Nathan. Mr. Pearson?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am Felix Pearson, ordinary Caribbean man. I'm your layman on the panel this evening. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago professionally, an attorney at law. I have been involved in planning and implementing male outreach programs, I would say over the last, over 15 years or more, serving as men's ministries leader in my church on several occasions, and implementing as a member of the Rotary Club of Maracas St. Joseph in Trinidad and Tobago, several male outreach community type programs. And we have done that over the last 12 years or more as well. So it's my pleasure to be here this evening, and I look forward to a very engaging and productive discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. We were hoping to have Mr. Arthur Pierre with us this evening, but he was called away to the island of, to the country of Suriname, or to assist with the disaster they're having there with flooding. Hopefully we'll be able to get in and join us this evening. So let's get started, gentlemen. The Calypsonian black stallion refers to the Caribbean man as one who neither knows his origin nor destiny. His reference in the song to the same ship suggests that he is directly addressing those of the African diaspora. Can you use the next 10 minutes to create a definition and context for the term, the Caribbean man, more specifically, the English-speaking Caribbean man for the purpose of this program? Mr. Pearson, would you like to start?
Sure. The Caribbean man is a complex man. Simplistically, African ethnicity dominates the culture of the Caribbean, so we can conveniently describe the Caribbean man as the Black West Indian male, identified geographically by his nationality, with a level of national connectedness that engenders a sense of belonging, especially when he is in the diaspora. At his best, his identity is shaped by a unique social and cultural experience, a culture that is defined by a rich diversity of languages, food, music, national festivals, a diversity that gives the Caribbean its unique identity. At his worst, he is struggling to maintain a sense of self-awareness, trying to sort himself out. He suffers indecisiveness and a lack of consensus, and we can go way back to the Federation and all the way back up to the CCG. And we see that reflected in the culture and the thinking of the Caribbean man, reflected in our leaders and our politics. He's subject to the influences of our colonial past. He's very vulnerable to external influences. He competes to assert his existence. He's divided by politics, race, and ethnicity. But he is evolving, still striving for some kind of identity that is uniquely Caribbean and not influenced by the legacy of his past. That compendium for me is a representation of the enigma that is the Caribbean man.
Thank you, sir. That was a mouthful. Reverend Nathan? Oh, you're muted, sir. You're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I was saying the Caribbean man shares a multiplicity of ethnicity and cultural forces. He is predominantly Christian, but multiracial and multi-religious. I noted that you said to speak specifically to the English-speaking Caribbean, but I think it is important to still say that he's multilingual in that his mother tongue may not be standard English. He is creative, he's mobile, his family tends to be transnational. For example, in my own case, I have family in Panama, Cuba, originally from Barbados and St. Vincent, and we were domiciled in Trinidad. So that shapes the context. I think the part of the complexity of the Caribbean man is the fact that he's in the Caribbean at all. Because that didn't just happen by chance. And even some of the factors mentioned by my learned colleague, Felix, in regards to the Caribbean man, he is a construction, and therefore his life is actually faithful to the purpose for which he was constructed. Now, whether or not he decides that he wants to maintain that particular function is very much up to him. He is, of course, shaped by the historical factors shared with us through colonialism, through slavery, through indentureship, through Western capitalism, and therefore he is complex. He is a product of Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas meeting in the islands and mainlands of the Caribbean.
Thank you very much, Reverend Nathan. So in as much as this program is geared to family life, and you said so much about the Caribbean man, giving us a description of him, what are some of the characteristics that are common among men throughout the region, more so the English-speaking region? We know that except for Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and possibly Jamaica, we would be looking more closely at the African male. What are some of those characteristics that most likely, and I know somehow you alluded to it, Reverend Nathan, what are some of those characteristics that make the man from this region the Caribbean man, so that we look in Dominica or St. Lucia and you find some of those same traits in the guy in Trinidad or in Jamaica?
Well, I'll say that there's a predominant narrative. And I say predominant, meaning that there is a minority that may not follow the predominant narrative that is written. He tends to be the father of many children. In many cases, he is an absentee father. He finds himself with a machoistic outlook, meaning that he is overtly or overly assertive and with an exaggerated masculinity that is a product of the socialization that began in slavery and continued for hundreds of years. He's a product of violence, and therefore he produces violence in many ways, not just physically, but that is most dominant. He tends to be distrustful of his fellow male and somehow have come away with the idea that to be powerful means to have a lot of materialistic wealth, or to show off one's power through those things that he owns. I think I'll stop there and allow my colleague to continue. Yes.
Thank you, Reverend Nathan. And yes, I would want to avoid the stereotyping as well, and just highlight some of what I consider to be the predominant characteristics of what I would consider to be the Caribbean man in the family setting. And this is wholly anecdotal. It's not based on research, but more by observation over time. And I endorse what Reverend Nathan would have said and what he would have identified. I would want to add as well that the typical Caribbean man in the family setting presents himself as a hard worker, presents himself as someone who is industrious in terms of having the ambition. He prides himself in being a provider for his family. The macho ego is there, where he would want to boast of his prowess and his adventures and his accomplishments. He is sensitive to the needs of his family and to persons that are significant to him. He's a protector of his family, especially his wife and his daughters. Somehow we tend to think that the male will evolve into their own personality and develop their protection. He's recreational, he's carefree, he's fun-loving. He can strike a balance between hard work and the essentials of the needs of the family. He is not overly religious. As Reverend Nathan said, he's given to multiple families and absentee fatherhood. But there is a greater consciousness of his role in the family today. And his perspective has also now evolved, where no longer does he feel he is solely the breadwinner and doesn't need to share in nurturing of the family. And he assumes a greater role now in the father in the home in terms of adding to the quality of the family life.
Thank you, Dr. Reverend. Thank you, Mr. Pearson. I'm giving you all the titles this evening.
All the titles.
Yeah. So let's pause. Take some questions from the audience. I haven't seen anything in the chat as yet. I probably didn't mention that, but you can pose your questions in the chat. So if you have one, we'll be happy to we'll take it at this time. Probably before we get to the next question. So if you have a question, you didn't get a chance to write it in the chat, you want to just raise your hand, use the emoji, raise your hand, turn on your camera if it's possible, and we will recognize you and allow you to ask that question at this time. Is anyone out there with a question? All right. Okay, so my question then is that we cannot escape the negative connotations of the Caribbean man. So Dr. Pearson, I heard you quite well, but we have the negative behaviors. And although this problem may be universal, I think that as a Caribbean man, oftentimes we need to listen to what our sisters say about us. And so if you just give me one little minute here, I am going to try to share my screen a little bit with you. And just give you a little bit of entertainment before we probably share screen. Just give me 1 sec, please. All right, you gentlemen probably would just want to probably add anything to what you have said previously on this, what you've been saying.
Well, I think while you find your share screen, I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that the Caribbean man is struggling with the societal changes that are taking place, particularly in regards to Caribbean women's upward mobility. He's struggling to find his place outside of that traditional. Okay, you want to go ahead?
Okay, great, thanks. No, finish up your statement.
Yeah, he's struggling to find his place, his level of importance and value in amidst these fairly dramatic changes that are taking place all around him. And sad to say that in a number of cases, I'm not going to say the majority, but in a number of cases, he feels it necessary to negate his female companions' mobility by using his, in quotes, authority or power. And sometimes that's violently. I don't know if Mr. Pearson would accept that that is a current challenge that we face.
Yes, I can endorse that position.
Yeah.
And I would just want to add to it as well that I believe a contributing factor to that predisposition really has to do with the insecurity that the man sometimes experiences and the risk that he feels of becoming an endangered species given the developments within the society.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So let's hear. This is Lady Watchman, I think it is. So let's hear what she has to say.
Stand up and be counted. A defense must be mounted. No, we can't wait no longer. Make your family stronger. Every day of the week, they pass and spur. What we call them, what we call them. On the world food chain, the lower than worse than cheapskates. Yes, them jailbirds. To raise a child need both parents too. But some daddies run, missing in action. To sing this song come like deja vu. Look, mister, if you need man, make a better contribution. Cause in every second home there's a single mother. While daddy gone to roam like a fear border. Playing macho man while he breathing non-stop. If you cannot find your child, well then brother, brother. In every home you're sowing strife, children need a daddy in their life. Plus your son, he must struggle without a strong male mother. Young boys fall and pray to crime because in their life there's a hole. Deadbeat, step up and play a role.
All right. Well, I think we had a little bit of entertainment tonight. I'm not sure how who was dancing and what have you. Deadbeat, step up and play a role. That's how Lady Watchman sees the situation. Gentlemen, what are some of the factors, cultural, religious, socio-economic, and political, that could have contributed to this negative stereotyping of men in the region?
After you, Dr. Nathan.
Okay. I think it is important for us to acknowledge that we cannot speak about the Caribbean man without speaking about the Black man. And I use the term Black to designate a particular type of socialization that has sought to make sure that the image of the Black man during the time of the transatlantic slavery was one of almost animalistic in one sense. Secondly, he was really not allowed to think for himself. So a particular story type, I use the term narrative, was inculcated in order for him to carry out a particular kind of function in the society. Now, if you can, I'm in Barbados here, we had a colonial history from 1624, some say 1627, all the way through to independence, 1966, thereabouts. And during that time, the male image, the Black male image, was one of, yes, being hardworking, but not one given to anything positive except for the production of other slave children and so. So given that context, the fact that we do have strong male role models, men in homes, contributing to the society in so many ways is almost a miracle in its sense. All right, so I want to start from there. The second thing I want to say in terms of what has contributed to the caricature that is presented by the Calypsonian is the fact that part of the violence done to the Black man and then perpetuated by an inability to fully comprehend what has taken place and what needs to be done is the whole issue of poverty. Okay. 80% of the Caribbean population is within 2 salaries of abject poverty. The region has not been able, in all of its political machinations, all of it, even its variety, has not been able to empower the Black man in terms of employment. Even our education system is failing at least 50% of our students, irrespective of where we are in the region. And therefore, his ability to be that provider is challenged. His ability to be able to take care of his family in a particular way is undermined. So I would rest those 2 things as things that shape his context. And I mentioned earlier about the flip side of women's mobility, but we'll come to that in a while.
Dr. Pearson.
Yeah, if I may continue from the last point that Reverend Nathan was making with respect to poverty. And it's interesting that even though you have widespread poverty within the region, it is interesting to note that the research has indicated that the Caribbean man is fairly high on the scale of per capita income compared with other areas. And I found that to be a very interesting statistic. So that while you will have the elements of poverty, overall as an average, the Caribbean man stands in a very good place when it comes to income per capita. Interestingly as well, that research also showed that the Caribbean man was very high on the scale of human development, so that he is seized of fairly good human capital and capacity, again, compared with other societies. The Caribbean man is part of a social fabric where there is an entrenched patriarchal system, where there is a position that he is entitled based on the patriarchal system. He stands in a position to assume that role. And interestingly as well, that research also indicated that boys are perceived as rowdy and in need of severe discipline. And that is the context that the research has placed the Caribbean man. Studies in education also would have very importantly categorized, that this is of more recent vintage, categorized the Caribbean male as an underachiever. And that is to be underlined as a factor that has had a major impact on the psyche of the male, because we would have seen in the realm of education where we have girls outperforming boys at examinations. And basically, some positions are basically being reserved in tertiary education where you have a predominance of females as opposed to males. So the male is disadvantaging himself there as an underachiever in the realm of education. The studies also indicated that the male has this rigid masculine gender identity that we would have called the machoism, so that he is informed and influenced by this image of himself, where he has this very rigid and inflated, exaggerated male ego that surrounds and informs his actions and his behavior. And that disposition is what leads to what we now have as violence against women and girls and intimate partner violence, where the global average is that you would have at least 30% of the females experiencing that at some time in their lifetime. In the Caribbean, the statistics are very interesting. In Jamaica, it is below the global average, it's 27%. In Trinidad, it is spot on. And interestingly, in Belize and Guyana, it is up to about 60%. So it gives you an idea of where we stand with respect to how the male is affected, how his psyche is affected, and how it informs his deviant behavior. Mm-hmm. And those behaviors were found, again, to be more prevalent in lower income households. So again, we can create the nexus there again between poverty and how it impacts the male behavior in the household. And I will end on this other point, very interesting, the feminine literature, which sometimes we don't like to read because it affects the equilibrium sometimes. The feminine literature describes the Caribbean man in the context of hegemonic masculinity. And that speaks a highly negative and toxic concept. It speaks to the residue of the dominant personality of the man and how it continues to affect his actions and his behavior, even in this modern era. And that is credited for the same underachievement and violence that we would have spoken about. So these are some of the factors that contribute to the negative stereotypes that we currently associate with the Caribbean man.
Thank you, gentlemen. We
have Dr. Henry.
Yes, sir.
I do know there's a question, but I want to make a attack back, if you wish, at something Felix has said. In regards to the per capita income, certainly it is true that our region per capita means per head, if I remember correctly. Okay, yes. But what it does not determine is the equity of distribution. And what we find is that the distribution of the wealth that is in the region is not equally divided among the people. And in particular, the person of African descent finds themselves at the lowest rung of the ladder economically, to the point that when comparisons are made at the time of emancipation in Barbados, the percentage of wealth that was in the hand of whites or those who, in quotes, were near white, in regards to the majority population who had just come out of enslavement, not much has changed in regards to who hold on to the echelons, the higher echelons of the economy in Barbados. And that's also reflected in a number of different territories. So I don't necessarily find it helpful to the point to the per capita without talking about the equity in regards to distribution. On the issue of male underachievement, there's a term that is used when speaking of education, NEET, and that is persons not in education, employment, or training. And 50% of boys 15 to 24 in the Caribbean fall into that category. They've dropped out of secondary school, they're not in employment, and they're not being in trade, or not in training in the sense of whether we are talking about the vocational sector or so, but they are being trained. They are being trained as unattached youth who are unemployed, unoccupied, and not seeking employment. Therefore, they work or move around in what we call the informal sector which can lend itself to recruitment in gangs and so forth.
Mhm.
So I wanted to add that.
Great, thanks. When you speak, I'll come to the question just now. When you speak about the distribution of wealth,
Mhm.
I am seeing the situation where, if you look at Trinidad and Tobago, that after emancipation, majority of the African slaves were given plots to work on. And that's what I learned in the history books, that they were given little plots to develop, what have you. Most of the slaves, they refused. They just refused to take the plots. They went off to their wherever, and most of them sought to continue with their trades and what have you, instead of continuing to work on the land. So I think one of the things, and even up to this day, I could remember in my school days that agriculture was not something that you wanted your children to become involved in. You wanted them to drift as furthest apart from what looked like slavery. The Indians came after emancipation through indentured servant, and through working the land and other means. I think for my viewing of Trinidad and Tobago from just a layman's perspective without the data, I think that economically, the Indian population seemed to be in a better, the Indian males seem to be in a better position than the African male. So what has caused all of that? I mean, is it just that is it just that we have not been able to rid ourselves from slavery and all its entrapments as African males?
Felix,
I'll let you go first.
Okay, sure.
If you don't mind.
I would attribute that largely to the ability of the generations before us to mobilize what was available to them and to prepare for the next generation. It has to do with what you have to work with and how you develop it and what is available to you as a return on that for further distribution or passing on. And I think we have been distracted by so many things and our priorities have been distorted, that we have not really been able to focus on really providing a proper heritage for the next generation. Even now, when we look at the way assets and wealth are managed and utilized, we tend to focus sometimes more on expenditure than on investment, because we are always about more of the immediate than about thinking about the long-term interest and development. And I would say that is what I perceive to be a weakness of the Black man and the heritage of the Black man, that inadequate preparation for the next generation, the consolidation and the planning and the passing on, so that we invest in the future development and the interest of those who are coming after us.
You want to add?
I would take as, oh, sorry, did you want to add something, Dr. Henry?
No. I was asking if you wanted to add anything.
Yes.
To.
I want to also agree that it is what you have to work with. What compensation did the enslaved African receive after 5 generations of slavery? There is no compensation.
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, the enslaver was compensated. Okay,
Right.
One.
Yes, that's correct.
Secondly, I am not quite sure of the historical data. I thought I was fairly familiar with it, but I don't remember coming across any large-scale distribution of land to the African to plant. If, from what I have read, and I'm more familiar with the Eastern Caribbean, right down to Trinidad, I am familiar with the fact that unless he stayed close to or on the plantation, he was victimized and punished. So that if he was found on the roads taking vegetables to the market, you would have to pay the poll tax, because there was a desire by the former slave masters to hold on to this cheap labor source. Okay. That is what I'm aware of. And therefore, he was discouraged from wanting to go on his own, but he was very suspicious. As a matter of fact, in 1834, he was told Queen Victoria had basically set him free, but the slave master said, no, you have another 4 years to work. 4 years to work to compensate the slave master for allowing you to be free, which is the 4 years of apprenticeship, which sometimes we don't always cater for. So he had to work for free for 4 years.
4 years,
yeah. All right. Given that, the resources, the capacity to do business, to invest, to delay one's gratification for a long-term goal comes out of one's cultural resources. All right? That's where you draw that sense of, let me say, business acumen from. Okay. Our cultural resources were by and large destroyed to a greater extent, except where it could be, let me say, disguised in religious activity or musical activity, which for the owner was entertainment of some sort. And so I would say we started at a negative or a disadvantage. So the whole issue of the family unit was deeply corrupted by all of that which comes with slavery. Now, I know that I am, according to the statistics, at least 4 out of 10 persons going to say, when are you people going to get over this slavery business? All right. And I hear that loud and clear. Okay. But I just want to say that the Jewish community faced somewhere between 20 to 25 years of Nazism. Have been identified as a traumatized group, given compensation, and continue to get compensation. Okay, the African person enslaved for over 250 odd years. No trauma therapy. And we expect him to be just, all right, up and running. Okay, others have come after you. And it really, really is unfair to comment about another group that was brought in vis-a-vis the East Indian, because they did not come with the same disadvantage. Okay, all right. So it just isn't fair, but beyond that, we have to understand that that in itself created an impoverishment of the African, because you brought in a large, again, cheap labor to replace, which then made the labor wages of the African even less, all right? Hence some of the hostilities that exist, okay? So given all of that, where do we go? And I suspect that this is where the direction we need to move in.
Yes.
Where do we go with having all of that legacy,
Mhm.
all right?
Mhm.
All of that currency, all of that historical resource, be it negative or otherwise,
Mhm.
and the impact of the Christian faith.
Right.
I suspect that is the next point. So I'll pause there. Maybe you have a question or Felix wanna say something.
What I want us to do is to just probably respond to the two questions in the chat. The first one is, could it be that the women's liberation movement has dealt the Caribbean man a stunning blow from which he is still reeling, and he has not yet found the appropriate response to this movement? Based on what you are saying, I don't think that this, you are saying that long before the women's liberation movement, he was dealt a blow. So let's say how this probably may have added to the situation and or caused him to paralyze him even worse than he is. So any of you gentlemen?
Yeah. If I may say, but just before I comment on the question, just to make one final comment on the last contribution of Reverend Nathan. And I agree 100% with your position on that. And I am one of those who, as you said, I'm disposed to want to think, okay, that is our historical antecedents. That is how it has affected us. We have been disadvantaged by it. But now I want to impose a contemporary burden that says, okay, what is the stock that we now have, and how can we utilize this to benefit ourselves and our generations better and take us out of the way we would have suffered in the past? And I'm saying that we have the capacity to do that. When we talk about the human capital of the Caribbean man, we have the capacity, we have the will to get it done. So for me, in terms of the way forward, the vision has to be a consciousness, a willingness, and an assumption of that responsibility for us to move beyond the antecedents of our sufferings in the past and our disadvantages. Yeah. In terms of the impact of the woman, I would say certainly with everything that the Caribbean man has had to compete to manage, he has had to compete with preserving what he would have considered to be his dominance and his manhood, and the intrusion on that by the progress that women would have made. So that he found himself having to make serious adjustments, and he would have lost some of what he would consider to be even his economic power in the household by the liberation of women going out and earning and potentially earning as much or more than the male in the household. And that would have affected his perspective, his operation as the male figure in the household. And that too has created a problem from which he has had to recover.
Okay. You have anything to add to this, Reverend?
Yeah, I want to say that what the women's liberation movement did was to bring empowerment to many women in our region. Empowerment in the sense of access to education, access to employment, and therefore access to resources that would allow her to fulfill certain of her aspirations. I think one of the things that has happened in the Caribbean that did not happen to the same extent in other Western areas, I'm speaking specifically of the US and Europe, was the idea that women's liberation was anti-man or anti-male. Okay, there was it just wasn't taken the same way, and there is some evidence to show that that seemed to have been I can do without a man. That kind of idea came up. I'm not saying that it was justified or that it is justified to keep women in quotes in their place, be that in the home or in servitude. I disagree with that completely. I believe that the image and likeness of God as given in scripture makes us co-creators and collaborators in home building. All right. But to just say that the impact of women's access to education and to employment has been a level of image devaluation by the Black man, which has been taken to mean a weakening of the authority of fathers and husbands in the home, a loss of authority, control, and respectability in the society that was mainly patriarchal. So I would want to add that to that discussion.
All right, so let's take the next question, because I think you started to talk a bit about it. Why then, I mean, if the woman has done so much to educate herself, what is the problem? Plain simple, what is the man's problem? Why is the man not taking on these responsibilities and seeking to be educated also? Why the man dropping out from education, acceptable employment?
We may find the response of the man being a reflection of his inability or his difficulty in coping with the challenges of his own development. Sometimes it might be his qualifications, it might be his skill, it just might be his capacity and ability to succeed. So that itself introduces a challenge for the male. There's another issue where there may be other alternatives, or we may call distractions, where there are other things competing for his interest and his attention, competing for his ability to perform in a particular area. And it really has to do, again, with him understanding and having the discipline to determine what is principal and essential, what would benefit him and the family the most. And if he lacks that perspective, then he is liable that he can make a wrong decision that does not reflect a proper choice with respect to the alternatives and the options that are before him. Then you can have the downright deviance of abandonment of responsibility, or opting to take an easier course, even making yourself dependent, if it is that that opportunity presents itself. So all those are challenges that the male will be confronted with. And really, it requires a strength of character, a deep understanding of self and responsibility, personal responsibility, to really assist in arriving at the right conclusions and making the best decisions.
Thank you. Jan, I came through an era, and you know, I lived in the 60s, so I'm an old man. And I remember what I remembered from that era, that the average Black boy had a pride about himself. And the 60s, 70s. And that is visible. That is visible through the attitude of our cricketers, who wanted above everything else to pay back, to show that they were better and superior than our colonial masters. By the time we got 20 years later, 30 years later, the whole system seemed to have everything seemed to have fallen apart. It seemed as though all the hard work for done by the Black Power movement, all of these other strides that would have been made, it seems as though that everything just fell apart, that we just took to a sort of laissez-faire attitude among our young men, and seemingly they just do not have that drive, that will to want to achieve, to want to do anything anymore. Am I right?
I want to beg to differ. I am, as part of my ministerial responsibilities, I had the opportunity to be a guidance counselor at a boys' college in the East-West corridor of Trinidad and Tobago, an area that was perpetuated with increased in violence and also a predominantly African population. And we found that with intentional action, well thought out programs, the young Black or a young African male could be challenged to rise in his aspirations, and fulfill his potentiality. We also found that it was possible to get him to come to terms with a changing world, not a world necessarily pitted against him in the sense of female to male versus male, but a changing world that would require him to adapt to this growing social mobility of women, at the same time as him having a respect for himself, confidence in his ability to be able to do. And so I ask a different question. I ask, what is the education of this Black child, male child, all right, in this sense, that would produce this balanced, motivated adult? What do we have to put in order to get this out? And I think when we move from that position, because then it's not just a problem of males, there is a growing problem of the females who have even headship over the home of this young male. So we have to ask, what do we have to feed in, whether we are male or female, to be able to produce this product that we say we want? And when we do that, it begins to remove a level of animosity. It's them and us. It's us. And if we are to have families, we've got to be able to, as my grandmother would say, lance this boy.
So if I get you right, you are saying that one of the problems, or the problem, I think what I'm hearing you saying is that the problem has been the education system between the 60s and the 90s that may have contributed to the issue that we have, the change in outlook of the young Black man from the 60s, the guy who was rallying and crying for freedom under the Black Power movement, to the one now who is willing to just be enslaved by working for somebody, by robbing a store, as the case may be.
Can I go again, Felix? So you want?
Sure.
Yeah. Yes, I want to say it's part of the education, but I want to say that the education that we have is not producing the educated adults that we want.
I see.
There is something deficient, okay, in the education system. One that I think you had mentioned, these students, these male students, too rowdy. These male students, they wouldn't sit down. You know, this, yeah, that issue. But there is also the issue of white collar and blue collar jobs. Okay, there is the issue of I remember saying to a parent at a career day that their son was a tremendous sportsman and could pursue a career in that field. And this parent went ballistic. No, I want him to do sciences, blah, blah, blah. And this child had no aptitude for those subjects at all, but they were convinced, no, I waste my time to send him to this school, blah, 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 you know, all right? And it took all of my experience and some of the head, the principal, to be able to just help this parent to understand that you've got to look at the child's aptitude, skill set, and all of these when you're making those kinds of decisions, all right? So I'm just saying that there's a whole educational deficit that is failing almost 50% of our children, okay? And with that, even those who get or accept the education that is being offered, the education that is being offered is not suitable for the jobs that are available. So then we have another problem, the educated unemployed. So I think that has to be in the mix when we think about wanting this, in quotes, balanced, highly motivated male adult.
So before, Dr. Pearson, could you jump in here and just put your piece to that before I jump to the whole idea of the church, what our responsibility would be in trying to achieve what we think is supposed to be the ideal Caribbean man?
Right. So to add to what Reverend Nathan would have said, yes, there is the defective education system where we may have deficient programs, where there may not be a proper fit between training and the transition to job opportunities. But there are also some external factors as well that I think are very salient to this issue. And the biases that we introduce very early in the realm of education, we need to address that as well. The stereotypes that we create with respect to education and careers, that needs to be dealt with as well. Very importantly, the psychological conditioning and socialization of our children with respect to their educational choices and how it relates to their future endeavors, that needs to be properly managed and ventilated as well. Equal opportunity for learning. There is still an issue even within the family where you may have inequitable opportunity for learning. By application of some demographic or the other, we determine, because we know that, again, in the past, you had a thinking that in large families, you will sacrifice 9 and the 10th one will be the doctor, the lawyer, whatever it is, but you will sacrifice the other 7 before. We're in an era where that needs a different kind of consideration, and we'll do well to provide a greater opportunity for all the children. And of course, another major issue that Reverend Nathan alluded to is, again, parents vicariously trying to live their ambitions to their children, where the children themselves are not allowed to choose and operate within the confines of their potential and their capability, but the imposition of parents determining for children what very well might be not a good fit in terms of how they progress in education.
Thank you. So the big question is that we have a situation where a number of our young men, for some people like Lady Watchman, they're deadbeats. And this is not what God intended for us, any of us to be. I don't think it's God, was not think, but we know that it wasn't God's plan for the guy to be just having children all over the place and what have you and so on. And so you guys, Men's Fellowship director, leader, pastor, what role do we have as a church? Because I believe the family is God's design. And the only institution that is here to execute that design, that can execute that design, is the church. So how should we go about? What should we be doing? What steps should we be taking to fix and to make the Caribbean man God's man?
Okay. At the risk of, I hope we won't lose anybody on the show tonight, but at the risk of folks saying he's a little too highfalutin with his words, etc., I want to say that the Caribbean Christian Church cannot adequately address the Caribbean man, the Caribbean woman, the Caribbean family, unless they take the Caribbean context seriously. What do I mean by that? The majority of our pastors and ministers are trained in the United States of America or trained in institutions in our region that is predominantly using literature that has nothing to do with us. And that is part of the problem. So very few Caribbean leaders have a handle on the Caribbean issues. I refer to my grandmother a lot. She is my major authority, for being even here. And she used to say to me, scratch where I itch. All right. And many times the Caribbean church refuses to even accept Caribbean culture as authentic and the Caribbean experience as a legitimate experience and seek to address that reality. And therefore, we find ourselves at odds. We have folks who attend our church 4, 5 services in a week, but has no compulsion whatsoever to go to other sources for relief that may not be Christian. So I'm going to stop there for now so that my colleague could get in. But I'm saying that the Caribbean region has to be addressed seriously. And we have to take seriously the whole issue. Let me use one of our prophets, who we don't designate as a prophet. But emancipate yourself from mental slavery. If we don't understand that as an issue, I'd say that the church has lost its way. Over to the Men's Fellowship director.
Right. So I endorse the point that context informs relevance, and that is very important in terms of being effective in whatever we undertake. I believe, however, that that the development of the Caribbean boy and the Caribbean male is really a tripartite endeavor, and it's a partnership really between the home, the church, and the school, each having its role to play. So the church really really is there to assist the family. Because the church is supposed to be endowed with certain gifts and talents and abilities that may not necessarily reside within the family, but it is there to supplement that effort, to support, to add further direction, clarification, and really assist in the development, like the school will to the family as well. And we have sufficient intellect and wisdom in the church. We should have sufficient intellect and wisdom in the church to guide us along that path. And if we find that we lack wisdom, the Bible says we can ask of God and he will give us liberally. So the question really for me is how diligent and disciplined we are in really carrying out that responsibility as a church. But I think it is inevitable, it is inescapable that the church has a fundamental role to play in the development of the Caribbean man.
Yeah, I am thinking about one of the aspects that is so needed at this particular point in time. The lady sang about the single mother, that like every other home, there is a single mother. And how does, how could the church help? And you're saying that the resources there. So you have a lot of young men probably are growing up, well, children, without that father model within the family. How do you see in a practical way that the church assisting people like that in a practical way?
In a very practical way, yeah, in a very practical way, and this may be arguable, but I run the risk of making the statement as well, that if the church is effective in its ministry, we may even find that there is a less incidence of single mothers for us to try to navigate through this process. If we succeed in instilling the proper values in our young men and our young women, they would create less of a situation like that for us. And they will be guided by principle in terms of how they will avoid such situations, and maybe even, God forbid that it does occur, that they navigate themselves and recover out of that situation. But I think it really has to do with the tools and the values that the church will instill in its members that will allow them to really escape some of these pitfalls.
What says the pastor?
One of the most quoted scripture in, let me say, excuse me, in Pentecostal evangelical context is that without a vision, the people perish. What if your vision is faulty? What if you're short-sighted? And this is why I come back to the church, and I'm agreeing with Felix. We've got to have a vision of ourselves, okay? The reality is that at present in the Caribbean islands and mainland territories, the majority of households are headed by a single female. Mm-hmm. Let us work with what we have. We have to come to the assistance of that mother who is seeking to do her best to keep a family together. A girl, children, by and large, are going in a direction that she wants. There may be the issue of teenage pregnancy coming along somewhere, but she's really troubled by the fact that the boys around her or impacting upon her son or sons seem to be inclined with a different value system to the one that she wants. Okay, we've got to help that mother. We've got to help that mother with the mentoring programs, the educational programs, the socialization programs the spirituality programs, the emotional intelligence issues. We have to go a little further and think outside of the box. And this is why I keep talking about sometimes the colonial mission theologies that we received in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s are still with us. And those theologies really made the Black Christian a passive personality. Okay. The issue of financial literacy has to come on the church's agenda and in Sunday school, in Bible study, business development, issues that relate to identity formation. In other words, how do we recover the Black African image? We have got to stop putting up these images of a white, blue-eyed Jesus that is totally irrelevant to the historicity of the Bible. And if we don't do those things, we cannot but have problems. We have problems accepting ourselves. Today, I am walking in the streets and I'm hearing one Black child calling another Black child Blackie. Into the 2022 Barbados. So it seems to me that if the church is going to be the agency of change and in collaboration with family and school, we have got to begin to address these deficits. Family life development has to be about singleness training for those who either by choice or because of death or whatever, they find themselves in a single state. There has to be premarital counseling. There has to be family enrichment, post-marital counseling. Really, the sky is the limit. But we've got to get out of this idea that church is about how often we could get people into our buildings, and when in buildings, that worship is only about this tingly feeling that goes down your back when you lift your hand up in the air and close your eyes. Worship is about how we engage life. And if someone asks for chapter and verse, I'd say just go back to Moses coming before Pharaoh and he's saying, let my people go so that they may worship. What was the worship? That they would go and find their way, develop a culture, develop a nation, develop a society. So worship is more than just the songs we sing on Sunday or the choruses, whether they are sung by people from the US or the UK, or, well, we hardly sing any of our own gospel because that's not sanctified, right? Sorry, I got onto my pulpit there.
Yeah. Well, listen. I'm gonna get ready to wrap up. We are almost close to the time here. Somebody said in the chat just now, I think I just saw, let me just get to the chat here. Just give me a second. This is putting out a lot of useful information. And the other statement that was made, I think the University of the West Indies needs to research this matter. I think that has to do with the whole idea of the Black person or the Black man, his development in the region. And I say we seem to be missing something. Yes, so I have said that I believe that we are missing a lot. And I think the forum that we have started here, the discussion that we have started here, we are basically seeking to change our position in developing the family as we move forward. And I think these conversations are a must, that we must have these conversations. The only one thing that I feel a little disappointed about is that our platform can hold 100 devices. And we are seeing a third of the capacity being taken tonight. I would like to bring back these gentlemen. I would like to ask them to come back to continue this conversation. We are far from ending. We are far from bringing an end to this. This needs to be, we need to be speaking more about this. So please give me some support there. If you think what I'm saying is true, go to the emotions and let me just see some clap hands or something or the other. Make me feel that I'm saying the right thing. We need to have these gentlemen back. We need to continue the discourse, and we need to ensure that we do this because you know, Reverend Nathan said that we need to, or Felix, I can't remember which one of them, but we need to be doing some of these things in the Sunday school, but we're not getting them done in the Sunday school. The whole idea of worship is just, it's going to still be for that tingly feeling. It's still going to be taken up most of the times by the lifting of the hand, the worship and what have you, the praise to God. And I'm seeing the hands are going up, right? The claps are going up. And we need these conversations. And if we can get more people into these conversations and we go out and start implementing what we are hearing, I believe change can come. We can see a difference in our society. We can see, first of all, a difference in our homes. And if homes are changed, the church will change. And if the churches change, the society will change. And so let me ask you, before I do this, before I ask again for these gentlemen to make a commitment to come back, that you make a promise to them that you are going to bring at least 2 friends with you when you come the next time, so that the platform can be filled. I know that we would have some out on their YouTube channel looking on, and so we greet you also. Thank you for being there. I haven't been able to check the channel because I'm on this side hosting this evening, but let me ask the gentlemen to give their final thoughts for tonight. And then Dr. Neff, I see you somewhere. Dr. Neff is one of our main hosts. I have just stepped in here to try, because we wanted to keep this as an all-male program this evening. So I'm going to let Dr. Neff come in and say a few words. But who's going first? Your closing thoughts.
I would say that.
Go ahead, sir.
That we need to be hopeful and develop the confidence in our menfolk that one day we'll get it right. Ultimately, our considerations must transcend parochial gender roles, and we must see ourselves as human beings with a sacred responsibility to replicate the character of God in us and have a duty of care to each other. When that becomes a reality, I think then we will be well on our way to creating that new and ideal vision for the Caribbean man in the family. And I think that it is achievable, but it requires focus, definition, and the will for us to attain to that level.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pearson. Reverend Nathan?
I remember being approached by some young ladies in a church that I was pastoring in central Trinidad at the time. And they basically said, Pastor, there are no young men in the church. Who are we going to marry? And I said, why? Is that a problem? And they said, of course. And my thing was, so how come I never heard this in the prayer meeting? Okay. Never heard it in the prayer meeting. Nobody coming in the prayer meeting. You know, we need to pray for young men. We need husbands. Okay. So the issue of our spirituality has to be grounded in our reality. The issue of our spirituality has to be grounded in the reality. And the reality is that we need we need salvation to be applied to the male image of men in the region that would allow them to be co-homemakers, good husbands, good brothers, good uncles, good social activists. I'll dare say good kingdom builders. And that is what we have to be praying for. But after the praying, we have to take action. And just another 30 seconds to say that after I had that inquiry from the young ladies, and I made sure that they brought it as a matter of prayer, we then said, okay, where do the young men in this village hang out? And that's where we started having open air meetings. And the situation changed.
Yes. Mhm. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. So let me introduce the two individuals from our planning team this evening who are here with us, Dr. Neff and Pastor Griffith. So word from both of you, and then we're gonna just share my final thoughts, and then we are going to wrap up.
Hello, everyone. My internet is a bit unstable, so I got kicked off a little bit ago. So I didn't hear the closing remarks, but I tell you, this was such a deep, riveting conversation that I think I do agree that we need to do some more of and invite these gentlemen back so they can share their words of wisdom and help us be better at raising our families and raising our young men so that they can grow into men that would not fit the stereotype that we heard of at the beginning of the session. So thank you, gentlemen, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Yes,
Thank you,
good night
Dr.
again. And
Yes.
I want to say quickly that males, both young boys and adults, pass through the church and are still members of the church. I say that because they already come to us and they're already formed, and whatever is in them is already there. The church must be deliberate in reaching out to the needs of men. It means that we need to decide or revisit how we develop our ministry or we deliver our ministry so that we can affirm and encourage men. And also we need to understand the importance of male support group. And I also want to end by simply suggesting that the issue of children, fathers, men fathering many babies, it has already been established that if you get babies when you are young as a man or one, chances are you're not going to stay with that woman, and chances are you can get another woman pregnant, and who knows how far it can go, because sex can get babies, and then you can't support the family. I pause.
Yeah, so we need to fix all of that from the church to make sure we get the right message to our youths and to our young people so that they learn to develop good families as the way how God planned it when he planted Adam and Eve in the garden. Amen. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for your contribution this evening. Those who have been listening, thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. I cannot allow you to go unless I sell my book to you. It's on Amazon. The title is, I forgot the title. Ready for Love? How About Marriage? And so it's on Amazon. The electronic copy, I think, goes for about $10, and the hard copy goes for, I think, $25, $26 thereabouts. So just go in, write it down, Ready for Love, How About Marriage. If you didn't get an ad or something from me, it's there. And we continue, we will persuade our panelists to come back to be with us so we can continue the conversation. Next program, however, is on the 21st. And the ladies will be taking, it's going to be the program right after Father's Day. The ladies will be doing the panel discussion, and the question would be, or the subject will be, a good man through the lens of a woman. A good man through the lens of a woman. And I'm certain that that will be very descriptive, or that will be very, with a lot of information also, because for some of us as men, we would want to know what a woman consider as a good man. So thank you for joining. And yeah, I want to find out myself, Brother Felix. So thank you for joining us. The Lord do bless you and have a wonderful night, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, Reverend Nathan and Dr. Pearson. Lord bless you all richly.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasant good night, all.
Good night, good night, good night.
Pastor Henry, could you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, sure, Dr. Neff. Yeah, I think I made you go. Oh, you probably got knocked off. So
Knocked
you
out, I did,
might
yes.
now still be cool. Hold on. Where is your participants? Just in, okay, I got it. No problem. You're good now.
Okay. Let me see if I can. One second.
Yes, thank you.
Oops, where'd it go?
It went somewhere else.
I'm trying to show you your book. There it is.
I think you switched to this. Your mouse went to another screen. That's all right. Thank you.
Can you see it now?
No. It's still on the.
Okay, let me stop sharing. And you could go ahead and close the.
Dr. Nev, you've got to pay for that book, you know.